Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu dem nächsten Beitrag. Normalerweise würde ich ja jetzt irgendwie ein paar Sätze sagen über das Mittagessen oder so, aber das haben Sie ja individuell allein zu Hause genossen. Das heißt, das geht nicht. Aber ich möchte Sie ganz herzlich willkommen heißen zu dem Beitrag von F-Secure, in dem Arran Purewal uns einen Einblick in das Threat Hunting geben wird. Arran ist bei F-Secure der Chef von deren Threat Hunting Team und hat Threat Hunting dort aufgebaut. Der Vortrag wird in Englisch sein. Arran speaks only English as far as I understand it. So I'm switching the language right now. My understanding is that you are hunting the bad guys, right? And you are going to present us with some insight on how you're doing this, what tools you're using in this, and how effective you are in hunting threats and cybercrime and APT actors. This is your stage, Arran.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I think, I say, unlike most Brits, my linguistic skill is slightly better than others. I speak an Indian language, which not many people speak, but unfortunately my German is limited to 0. So yeah, thank you for having me today. The content or the topic I would like to speak about is effective threat hunting. So F-Secure Countercept, as we are known, is a service that was built several years ago trying to help define the practice of threat hunting. It's a term which is ever present in defensive security, and it can mean multiple different things. I don't seek to say that our definition is the only or the complete one, but certainly in our interpretation, it has led us to be able to deliver a service and an approach that we think is a very decent one in the realm of blue team detection and response. So just for the next 20 minutes or so, I'd like to talk about firstly what threat hunting is. I think the second thing I want to talk about is detection and response, how utilizing our means of threat hunting enables us to provide a service which allows us to detect and respond to multiple different incidents that we see across a myriad of estates. And thirdly, a case study, something which shows the culmination of the approach that we utilize and our detection and response capability, to show a real-world example that was very recent on one of our customer estates that shows some of our capability and how we can utilize our approach and technology to deliver an effective service. So to translate the threat hunting approach into something which is a fully managed service. So the approach that F-Secure took towards threat hunting came from, I'd say, a noble place, but the understanding that traditional forms of attack detection were falling short. There was a problem with how most services went about trying to deliver detection. And we identified 3 key items that were deficient within the general industry. Firstly, it's designed around classic attacker TTPs, and secondly, around the idea of a known bad. What this means is that if an estate, an organization, is targeted with a novel, a new form of attack, the likelihood of it being detected utilizing classic signature-based TTPs or a known bad is close to 0. If you're not incentivizing people to research and identify new forms of compromise that may overtake take place on a given estate, the likelihood of being able to find advanced attacks is incredibly low. Thirdly, there's a heavy reliance on automation. Now, automation is by no means a bad thing, but it has to be utilized in the correct manner. Only that automation which enables a better form of human-driven analysis, as opposed to the traditional form of automation, which tends to lead to the kind of SOC alert fatigue that we as a threat hunting outfit seek to avoid. Now, taking all these items into account, how classic TTPs are simply not enough to pick up on advanced attacks, it ended up meaning that as opposed to being in a dynamic of a skilled attacker versus a skilled human defender, we found ourselves in a dynamic of a static machine-based detection mechanism against skilled cyber attackers, a human-driven approach. And what this meant is, or what we wanted to try and do, sorry, is to bring this back to a human versus human pursuit. And the consequence that we found is that detection utilizing the kind of automated, heavy reliance on TTP or classic TTP approach is that this form of detection was just not much better than prevention. As an industry, prevention is something which has been largely moved away from. Obviously, there are many benefits to it, but there was an acknowledgement that investment was needed in detection. Why? It's because prevention was not stopping all the attacks that it was originally cited as being able to do so, because it was a static, automated target. Now, if detection falls into the same traps as prevention, essentially it means that skilled attackers can simply navigate their way around both prevention and detection mechanisms that are put in place, and mean that cyber attacks will neither be prevented nor detected in an expedient manner. Taking all this into account, this is what we decided to use as the key motivators for building out our threat hunting approach. Now, in order to help define what threat hunting is, I like to use a parallel of a red team, use an analogy which is or a scenario which is directly analogous to how offensive security operates. If you look at the top of the slide, you can see the idea of red teaming or pen testing simply being vulnerability scanning does not exist. There is a human-driven, skilled part of pen testing which is needed in order to fully identify all vulnerabilities. We expect a human pen tester to emulate the types of activity that we would see a skilled or even unskilled attacker conduct in order to provide the best recommendations to see how far a given exploit can be taken in order to provide the correct recommendations for any form of future prevention. Now, defensive security, blue team security, has, in our experience, not conformed to the same standards. There has been an alert-driven detection approach, which is heavily automated. But the human-driven approach, which would fully enable you to identify all forms of adversary, in our experience, didn't exist. And that's where our idea of threat hunting came in, and this helped formalize the definition and approach that we now take. This means that by supplementing automated forms of detection, we can use a skilled approach whereby we get a myriad of people with different experiences, whether it be in pen testing or with an incident response, to work on the threat hunting, human-driven approach of defensive security. So this could mean developing automation or engineering that enables us to better query data which is not isolated or looked at or inspected by traditional forms of detection technology. It could mean using our response capability as high up the kill chain as possible in order to enrich prevention measures to stop any form of incident from occurring at some future point down the line. It involves utilizing all different skills from within our F-Secure to deliver a more human-driven approach to blue team security. Now, part of our threat hunting approach is to bring it as close as possible to a full blue team defensive service. Now, we find that there are various forms of research or types of research that enable us to better identify and build out detection capabilities. And a core fundamental part of that is utilizing the wisdom of our red team. This could be through people within a threat hunting outfit who have previous experience within pen testing and red teaming. It helps in F-Secure that we have a fully proficient red team with whom we work regularly in order to better identify the types of attack technique that need immediate detection capability built out. Similarly, we can use the wisdom that we have within our blue team to help red teams understand the types of attacks that are currently less capable of being detected. Hence, research and hypothesis generation is a key part of our threat hunting implementation. It means research within all different fields of security help us enrich our blue team and red team capability, leading us to permanently increase the capability that we have within our managed service. So I've spoken about what some of our threat hunting looks like and how we utilize research, but to put it in its kind of simplest possible terms, the approach that we take is slightly contrary to how other forms of detection capabilities work. Within our experience, traditional detection and traditional detection technology focuses on alerts that are generated. You might have raw data that comes in from multiple different sources, maybe an EDR, maybe logs and network data that is sitting in a seam, and there is some detection capability that may well sit above it, which generates some alerts based on predefined signatures or behavior. But this means that there is vast amounts of the raw data which sits entirely uninspected. Within threat hunting, our attempt was to try and unearth any forms of malignancy that may well lie within that raw data that is not presently queried or inspected by the form of detection technology that you have available. And also pragmatically, this means that traditional forms of detection mean that one is only as good as the detection technology which they implement, as opposed to changing the onus onto the skill of threat hunters to be able to identify any forms of malignancy and use automation in a smarter way in order to fulfill and help their hunting approach. Now, I think what I've spoken about for the first several minutes has been solely from a detection perspective. But within threat hunting, well, the approach that we've taken is to not just deliver a detection capability, it's also to be able to respond effectively. And we view ourselves very much as being a blue team. And within that, detection is only a small part or a constituent part of a blue team's responsibility. And to help substantiate the responsibilities of a blue team, there's a concept that was brought in by Microsoft a few years ago, a gentleman called Matt Swan, and he introduced the blue team kill chain. Now, there's two key parts of this sentence here that I want to discuss to substantiate why threat hunting and blue teaming as a practice needs to be able to fully remediate and utilize response capability. Firstly, the sentence says, I must detect and evict the adversary. This means that from a blue team perspective, detection is only one part of the game. A proper threat hunting approach has to have the capability to investigate and evict, to remove the presence of an attacker from a given estate. And the second part is the last clause of the sentence, before they access customer data. Hence, there is a temporal element to this, which has to be taken into account. Now, I won't go through the red team element of this, as I'm sure people are familiar with the cyber kill chain, which is chronicled and shown at the top. However, the various concepts within the blue team kill chain that are worthy of some kind of discussion. This shows that a full blue team capability should be able to not only identify, but triage, investigate, and contain any form of attack. Hence, if threat hunting stops at the capability to identify, they negate it, or they're simply not conducting the full level of responsibility that is necessary to call oneself an effective blue team. One has to be able to conduct each of these blue team steps in a more expedient manner than the attackers are able to reach their objectives. Hence, this means that if tickets are being passed back and forth from customers over to the provider, they are wasting time when the responsibility should be on a full detection capability to enact all parts of the response service and conduct each of these steps seen on the blue team kill chain. This means that whichever technology which is utilized for threat hunting should also within it have the capability to conduct various forms of response, to remove any malignant malware, to shut down and contain an attacker's presence by obstructing network communications, by removing persistence mechanisms. These are the steps that take threat hunting to the next level, but also are the justification for needing some kind of incident response capability to be able to utilize those skills, hopefully as early as possible within an attack kill chain. So we can utilize the forms of incident response at the execution or C2 phase. Now, again, to further substantiate this, I want to briefly talk about the incident response lifecycle. What I see here is a standard type of process which is used by incident response teams, but how I think very much fit into the threat hunting mindset as well. These steps here are what one would normally expect the process that is followed when a major incident has occurred. An IR team is brought in order to try and help identify and put recommendations and measures in place to stop the major incident from occurring again. However, I've crossed out the response at the top of this to show that this is the kind of approach that should be utilized whenever any security event, regardless of severity, occurs on a given estate. Each of these steps should be followed, even in the instance that one has a piece of adware or malware which is downloaded onto a single machine and contained only onto a single machine. The threat hunting capability needs to be able to not only detect that, but contain, eradicate, and utilize and provide any post-incident review in order to most helpfully identify any steps that help prevention in the future. So threat hunting doesn't just revolve around hypothesizing forms of attack detection. It also involves utilization of full response capabilities, processes, and technology to help provide constant and iterative improvements to a given estate. Now, to bring all of this together, I want to briefly, in the last few minutes, take us through a case study which shows a recent example of our threat hunting approach and how we managed to evict an attacker from an estate. What we have is a scenario which is unfortunately all too familiar. There was a website on one of our customer estates that was open to exploitable by SQL injection. Unfortunately, that still exists. I think by various OWASP standards, it's always first or second on the list of most regularly seen web vulnerabilities. What this meant was that this SQL injection enabled remote code execution on the SQL database that supported the application. Now, if this had been left undetected, what it would have meant is that they had direct access, and what we did see was some execution utilizing XP command shell. Now we could see the attacker even piping in raw hex bytes that were being written to .exe files, and they were executing them in order to try and get a full domain compromise of the estate. This the execution that they managed to find allowed them execution on the internal environment. It would have been a short matter of time before the full domain would have been compromised. That would have led to a substantial IR investigation that was needed. However, as threat hunters, the approach that we took within identifying this was that in several previous hunt sprints, there was a type of hypothesis that was generated that said, what would SQL injection look like on the databases that support a given application? By doing so, we're able to utilize the automation that we'd implemented that constantly looks for SQL injection to be able to identify immediately that there was a compromise on the database which originated from a separate web server. What we're able to see as well is this is when our response capabilities kicked in, able to identify when or the types of investigation that was needed. This meant that we could work alongside the customer to disable XP command shell. This is only a short mitigation measure, as we were able to see that the attacker had access to be able to re-enable it. And this is where some subtlety came in. We were able to remove the .exe files that were being dropped through the SQL injection vulnerability that they were taking advantage of, and remove their presence and make it look like antivirus, because the compromise was tried several times over the course of the same day. And then again, using some of the wisdom that we have within different fields of security, we're able to take PCAPs from the customer to be able to immediately identify the exact SQL statement that was leading to the full compromise. To put this in some context, if we were unable to provide mitigations and prevention, not only mitigations for prevention, but also immediate forms of detection which we could remediate, it would have meant that in order to fully patch this, the customer would have been obliged to conduct a full code review, to implement changes in a short-term manner that would stop the SQL injection vulnerability. But with us being able to identify the SQL statement and also work with them to recommend various forms of mitigation, such as simple ones such as web application firewalls, and provide the assurance that we were fully capable of detecting any attempted compromise, the length of time that a customer has or the customer had in order to be able to patch this increased massively, and they could take a far more prudent approach to the future form of prevention. That was a very brief overview, but there's three key things that I would like you to take away from this. I'm happy to discuss at the breakout session. I hope it shows that threat hunting is a complete approach to detection and response. In order to call ourselves a true threat hunting service, which equates itself to a blue team, one has to be able to conduct full elements of not only detection, but response. The second one is that detection supplemented with a true response capability just provides greater assurance. And I hope that the case study showed that to be evident. And the third one is that research is necessary to drive threat hunting. All forms of security fall into this dynamic, but threat hunting, which relies upon a gamut of skills that needs both response and red teaming attack hypothesis generation skill, that innovative research is at the core of what we do and what threat hunting involves. Thank you for your time today. If you've got any questions, I look forward to seeing you at the next breakout session.